podcast from Aydan and Mike is, I think it's really cool, and that is what I wanted to say.
Two and a mic. Two, 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 two and a mic. Two, 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 two and a mic. The youth have come into a phase of having and wanting to have political understanding. They have a lot of questions and want to learn about things. They want to do things. They demand the right to have a voice and to shape their future. Can the old dudes at the front please step aside? Families are polarized, and within households even, there are disagreements about opinions, politics and rights, and it requires young people to find their voices and speak out, regardless of who stands before them. Gun violence and climate change are two such topics. Aydan says, gun violence in school is such that we know it can happen to anyone, anywhere. It's terrifying to send a kid off to school and then pray they'll make it back alive. These words are chilling. Aydan speaks so well himself that I don't need to introduce today's podcast any further. Thanks, Aydan, for your time, passion, and perspectives. Yeah, it's all well and good being introduced by Tracy, but obviously you're a completely different person, and so I can't imagine that you have the exact same interests and characteristics that Tracy has. But yeah, you have some similarities, I guess.
Yeah, being my mom's son, always had kind of an interest in history and politics. She's always kind of like encouraged that through most of my life, is like taking me to museums and understanding cultures and really like kind of examining our past and having an appreciation for it. That's something that my mom's always really encouraged in me. But I've definitely taken much more of a political approach in terms of just like that's way more of my focus. I spend a lot of time reading about politics. Spend a lot of time talking to my friends about things like this, talking to random people about it too. I just love talking about it. It's something that I've always had an interesting passion for, much more than my mom always has.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, would you say that in that case you are not necessarily representative of people your age in the US, or would you say no, people are far more politicized nowadays than they used to be?
I think nowadays the younger population is really coming into a place of political understanding, um, and also a want to have political understanding. There are so many questions that we constantly have about like where things are at, why things are going the way that they are, and instead of it just kind of being like leaving it up to who knows what, like it's the government does it, it's no big deal. It feels like there's a lot more push and influence to want to learn about these things and learn why it is like how it is at the moment. Um, I think it's really awesome to see how many young people are getting into politics in the way that they are, especially in America, where politics is something that is so confusing for the vast majority of Americans.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking as somebody who is obviously a sort of an onlooker from beyond, it's in many ways you could say confusing. I mean, yeah, I do see this extreme polarization within American politics. I mean, do you think this is a part of the reason why young people are now engaging so much? Because it's become so severely polarized. You no longer have a choice, do you? As in, you either it's one side or the other, almost, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's gotten to a point like that. Um, it a lot of younger people are having this moment where their parents have these very specific viewpoints and they just don't accept those viewpoints that their children may have. Um, and that is a big place where it feels as though it starts is in the household, is with those sorts of um, like conversations that you have with your parents about these sorts of things. I've always been very lucky. My family has always been very open about these sorts of things, these sorts of conversations. Um, but I think that it definitely is at a point where young people feel as though there's like nothing else that we can do, uh, and that we just have to stand up and say something, and we have to do stuff. It's essential to where this country is going that young people stand up for what's right. Like if we continue to sit back, it's just going to continue the way that it's going right now with just in the past week of the Supreme Court, it's like in the hands of a bunch of old white people and Clarence Thomas, and that's about it. Like
Mm.
it's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, so many of these news reports that come out, and almost on a daily basis, there's a sort of BBC headline about the Supreme Court of the United States doing this, or some Republican saying this, and just earlier I saw on Twitter an article suggesting that women may have to show some kind of proof when crossing borders within the US from one state to another to prove that they're not going for an abortion or something like this. And I'm not sure how much of that is true, how much of that is fear mongering, because
Yeah,
that's a scary thing. That's a scary place to be, isn't it?
absolutely. It's scary when the idea of that happening they police don't do that for guns in America. It's not like when you cross a state line that the cops are going to pull you over and they're going to look in your car and check if you have guns. When Kyle Rittenhouse traveled across state lines and he murdered multiple people um, right after the George Floyd execution, like it's so ridiculous how the United States puts so much control on women's bodies and practically no control on something that is continuously killing young people in places of safety like school. Like, it's just, it's mind-bogglingly stupid.
Yeah, I mean, this is a part of the confusion which a lot of people from outside of the United States and very occasionally, well, not just occasionally, but very often me as well, because there are just so many different layers of government that can dictate some, extremely important processes, which under normal circumstances in a democracy, you would say that's just not possible. Um, but in the US, it's a bit different. But I mean, let's bring it back because I mean, I love having these generalized chats, and I think I could listen to your thoughts on these topics all day long. We
Thank you.
can yeah, it's good to hear you are you're so far at least knowledgeable in the area. Because I imagine that there are lots of adults in the USA who are who are nowhere near as clued up as you are, in the same way that this is the case in many other countries, the UK included.
Yeah.
But one of the primary topics that we wanted to talk about, and you touched on it there, is also gun violence.
Yeah,
Yeah, go for it.
gun
Do you wanna?
violence in America.
Yeah, it's yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different angles we can take on this. But first of all, I mean, you're young, so you're 18, 19 years old.
I'm actually 21.
You're 21. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
Um, but you went to school in the US, obviously.
yeah.
When the news came through that there had been another shooting, and yeah, unfortunately, there were any number of shootings that you could perhaps recall. Um, what generally was the mood like among you, your friends, your class, that sort of circle of youth?
Um, Truth be told, it, there were days where it, I remember it happened often. It wasn't like a rare occasion. Like I can't even pinpoint like one of them because there were so many that happened. In fact, at my school, there was one student who ended up saying that he was going to shoot up our school, and he made a post about it with like pictures of guns. and I didn't go to school the next day. I know a lot of other people didn't go to school the next day either, but it was always a like just kind of this surreal moment of just how, I guess. Like we in my school we saw a police officer, one or two, um, and they were usually a pretty nice person. They carried a gun on them, but it was personally, I feel like a lot of people in my school probably had a fear towards those police officers. We were um, I believe we had a pretty mixed racial group. I feel like we had a lot of Burmese students, we had a lot of black students, and we had a lot of white students. It was very mixed. Um, and so there were definitely groups in our school that felt this fear towards that police officer that I personally never felt because I never had that disposition to the police. Um, but I think that it's always been this very surreal moment of just how can this happen, and that this could happen to any one of us, like that this could have, in my time in school, that this could have happened, and that I now have a little brother who's going through the school system from like he's only in first grade, he's starting second grade next year, and to have to kind of like go through this again, but with somebody else who's much younger than me that I've had like this attachment to, it's terrifying. I can't imagine having a child and sending them off to school every single day and just kind of hoping that they'll come back, because we have so many rights for guns and we care so much about guns. But when it comes to your child, once they're out of the womb, America doesn't give a fuck. It's unfortunate. Like that's why education doesn't do anything in America. That's why we don't have any kind of daycare, healthcare for children. Like it's a weird thing that it's a weird country that we live in right now. Like it's just bizarre.
Yeah, and this is the development of government from both parties. So it's not as though the Democrats, when they're in power, they introduced mass child care or universal
Yeah.
health care or any of this. That didn't happen.
Nope.
And yet, still we've got this huge PR machine that represents the Republicans. These guys are, the baddies, and the Democrats are the good guys, and they're going to save us.
Yep.
But I mean, the truth is perhaps somewhere not quite where those lines fall, right? I mean, maybe the
Yeah.
Republicans are bad and the Democrats are a bit less bad. I don't know. How would you
Yeah.
see it?
It They're both bad. When Roe v. Wade got overturned, Nancy Pelosi sent out an email or a text message to all the Democrats and was like, "Send us some more money for our campaigning." And it's like, dude, you've been in power for over 2 years with the power of the House and the Senate, and you've also got the White House. The only thing that you didn't have in power was the Supreme Court, and you've pretty much fumbled the ball for the past 2 years. Like they've done nothing. We've seen very minor things. We saw some student debt relief happen, but it was barely anything in terms of the grand scale of America's student debt problem. Like it, Democrats are equally bad. What's unfortunate is that when it comes to the Democratic Party, it feels like there isn't this unified platform that we're all standing on. Like the Republican Party always has one thing that they'll stand on. Like they can always find one thing, like Tucker Carlson will always find one thing, and then the entire Republican Party can kind of like come together and be like, that's our thing, we'll stand on that, gun rights, abortion, Christianity, something like that. And then Democrats, it's like we want to do those same sort of things, but we're kind of like tiptoeing the line a lot more. Like we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but at this point, it cannot be about that. We really need, like the Democratic Party feels as though it needs to have a Tucker Carlson type in terms of somebody who's like aggressively pushing the left's agenda in a very similar way that Tucker Carlson does. And I think if we saw somebody do that, I think that the Democratic Party would be a lot more powerful and stand a lot better on its own.
Mm. As in somebody like perhaps Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, because
Yes.
I mean she's very much a representative, I would say, of the left. But the problem is that she doesn't carry the weight of support of the party, does she?
No, she unfortunately is too radical in her views, and a lot of people treat her very similarly to how people treated Bernie Sanders in terms of um, like he a socialist who and the Red Scare that happened in America. Like it's all very deeply rooted stuff that is just really old school and done. Like the Red Scare's over. It's been over with. It's we need to focus on our country. Like if we aren't providing and taking care of each individual person and from the bottom up, like I don't know. How do you expect all of our like working class to function and survive? How do you expect like with our current minimum wage being 7.25 in my state, like I'll let you know when I figure out how I can make that a living wage. I can't because housing just keeps rising in America. Like it's unbelievable how many of these issues just keep coming back and back and back. Um, it it's mind-boggling.
Mm. Yeah, it does make you wonder really what it's sort of education or political education classes teach students in the USA about socialism. Because when I hear comments like Biden is a socialist, you know, I'm not sure if I should fall over laughing or be scared about those comments. Because I mean, Biden would almost be an extreme conservative, I think, anywhere in Europe. But
Yeah,
in the USA, he's somehow, yeah, accused of being a socialist. I don't get it.
it's very confusing to have that sort of feeling and approach. It, I really don't know. It's really bizarre. It really is this deeply rooted fear mongering and whitewashing of history in the way that America does so often in its classroom. And that's really where it started in for a lot of us. Like coming out of our school system quite recently, like there are so many things that I learn on a daily basis that I realize the US has either decided that they weren't going to teach me through my school curriculum or that they just kind of were like, this was hush hush and the US didn't do this. And it was like, why don't we talk about these things? Why don't we talk about like the US arming the Mujahideen, like, and then that shit coming back to bite us on the ass? Like, there are a lot of really interesting things that the US has done that I'm really disappointed that don't get taught. And I think that we would see a lot more political discourse and conversation about these things if we actually took like a realistic approach to how the US started and how we teach that in the school. Like it's it's important to understand where your country comes from and including the horrific things that we've done. Like if anything it makes you realize what you need to come out of to be better, I guess. It's it's interesting in that way.
Mm. Yeah. And sort of tying this also back to, again, gun violence. If I'm not mistaken, there are at least two US presidents who have delivered speeches, if not more, with regards to the military-industrial complex, this sort of, again, not necessarily referring in this case to the shadow government because the NRA is quite obvious there. But, as in presidents of the past have commented on this this huge reach that the military or these sort of private military-related organizations have in U.S. society. Why is it, though, that they continue to exert so much control and influence on both parties?
Uh, because they make a lot of money, and that's what runs politicians in the United States. Arms dealing makes up God, I wish I had the statistics on me, but it is a depressing amount of money in terms of how much money the U.S. pumps out in arms. Um, we send guns everywhere. We send guns to our enemies. We send guns to our allies. We send guns to people we don't even freaking know. Like, it doesn't matter. The U.S. makes guns. It makes a lot of money for the U.S. too. And a lot of that money goes right into the pockets of these big politicians. It's the arms dealing in the U.S. is a very interesting thing to take a look at and to understand like how it impacts other countries as well, just like in terms of our neighboring country of Mexico, like how many arms go across the border of Mexico on a yearly basis. Like the U.S. has a gun problem. It is a uniquely American issue. There aren't any other countries with such a high earning GDP where so many people are getting shot by guns and dying by guns. Um, it and it feels like it's because of these big corporations that have this power to produce weapons and to just keep making money off of them. Like the AR-15 is one of the highest selling weapons in the United States, and that's because of its customizability. It's like buying a little DLC pack for your gun because you can customize it so much. Like the arms dealer makes custom gear that you can put on it, and it's just like extra little like additional packs that you can buy for your gun, and it's fucking disgusting. It's really wild how they set them up like school shooting starter packs. It's insane. It's insane.
Yeah, it's a scary looking rifle. I mean, I can't imagine why anybody can in any way justify owning a weapon like that. And yet it's almost become mainstream in some parts of
Yeah.
the country, hasn't it?
Yeah. It feels like a pretty typical weapon for people to want to buy in America. Um, and I'm not really a gun guy. Um, I mean, it's a scary looking weapon, but in America, like guns are kind of everywhere, and you get kind of used to seeing them. Um, like during our George Floyd protests in our town, I remember seeing like our police force roll out with those same big guns and standing in front of us, like the people that they're supposed to like work for and protect. And just like it it's interesting when you get to a point where civilians have those sorts of weapons and when the police are scared of those weapons. Like that's a huge thing. In with the Uvalde shooting, when the shooter came in, he had an weapon. I believe it was an AR-15, and the police were scared to go in there. Like they didn't want to go in and risk their lives. And it what always makes me so angry is that that's their whole job. Like our police force is equipped with bulletproof gear. They have a SWAT team. They have automatic rifles. They have dogs. They've got bombs. They've got all the things. They've got tear gas. They can do anything. They're basically an army in our country that just stays in country. And they couldn't take down one dude who was slaughtering innocent children inside of a school. Instead, they were putting their parents in handcuffs and spraying them down with pepper spray. It's it's mind-boggling when the system that you set up doesn't do the job that it's supposed to do, and that job being to protect children. Like, come on, figure it out. Like the one time where a cop is allowed to kill somebody, like or should kill somebody, and most of the United States, if not all of the United States, can get behind it. Like we don't accept police killing people in this country, and we haven't for a minute. But this is like the one time where it's like, come on, dude, I need you to kill that guy, and they couldn't do it. And that's what's infuriating is how often the police are taking the lives of people who do not need to be killed and instead are just kind of waiting around and with their fingers up their butt. Like it's nothing. It's frustrating, and it fills me with so much anger because this can happen to anybody. This can happen to anybody.
Yeah, I can feel the anger in your words and the way that you express it. You know, there's all of these different comebacks from the Republican side, and this concept of arming teachers. Now that this has been heavily derided in sort of the British press, or at least by some elements of the British press. I mean, how would you have felt walking into school? Your maths teacher pulls out an AR-15 and says, "Okay, kids, turn to page 42, and let's do your multiplication tables." I mean that would scare the shit out of me. I mean, how would
Oh
you feel?
yeah,
Yeah.
terrified. I mean, it it's it's such a weird approach to take. Like, if all the teachers just had guns, like, as soon as you add a gun into any situation, the chances of violence increase dramatically in that situation. And I mean, the chances of another student, like, what if a student gets angry and decides that they're going to pull that gun maybe from the holster of the teacher when they're walking by? Maybe the teacher doesn't have it securely locked away. Like, if that was the case, I imagine that we would have some kind of system in place to keep our guns safer, like we kind of do now, but barely. Um, but I just imagine that it would lead to more violence and more shootings happening in schools. Like, teenagers are rash and they just kind of do things, you know? Like, I can imagine this just kind of like that idea just leading to more violence and God, it terrifies me, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, teachers have already got enough on their plate, let alone having to spend their sort of summer holidays doing combat training.
Yeah,
To Yeah, I mean, can you imagine that? I wouldn't want to do
like
it.
we put a lot on their plate, and you're exactly right. Like in the US, we ask so much of our teachers. We ask them to do so much, and we don't pay them nearly enough to compensate for all the amazing things that they do. But then to add on top of it, like the job of somebody else who we already have that job made for, like it's just extra responsibility to somebody who shouldn't have it, you know?
Yeah, and the argument though that by arming teachers that they would inherently make schools safer was kind of blown out of the water by the Uvalde situation, because the police who were also armed, um, they were incapable for many reasons. They were scared to go in themselves, and these people are trained. Just by giving somebody a weapon doesn't automatically turn them into Rambo. They're not going to be
No.
able to save everyone. That shit's just television. That's Hollywood. You know, if you're a maths teacher or a religious studies teacher, you know, for all the best intentions in the world, if somebody's pointing a weapon at you, you'll probably crumble if you're not trained. I would.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We are moving into a really interesting point in America, and it's going to be really weird to see how we're going to continue to handle these issues. Like, it's important to remember that the next election for our president is very close, and I doubt that Joe Biden is going to run again. He barely did anything. He said that he was a one-term president. Like, I'd be cool with that. I'm honestly fine with it. I really wouldn't mind if he either woke up and did some stuff or just got out and let Kamala Harris take over. Um, but it's gonna be interesting to see who's gonna take all this on, because it's gonna be this is gonna this is gonna be an ongoing issue. This is gonna be an ongoing battle. Like, these things aren't going to just, unfortunately, they're not just magically going to change one day like Roe v. Wade did.
Mm.
Um, like, that's the unfortunate thing, is that there are too many weapons in the hands of people in the United States that there can't be like a weapon recall. Um, it it's just we're too far gone. Um, And so it's going to be really interesting to see how we can help combat our gun violence issues in the U.S. because it's an ongoing issue, and it's been an issue for decades at this point, and it's not getting better. Like, it just continues to get worse. 2020 saw like 45,000 people die from gun violence in America, and that's the highest that we've seen. Um, the number of mass shootings in the first, I think it was 145 days in America was like, I think it was 214 mass shootings in the first 145 days of the year. And that was this year. Like, guns and gun violence is an extremely uniquely American issue. And until America gets it figured out, we're just going to keep killing each other. And it's going to be embarrassing because it already is. Like, the United States used to be like this shining glory of some kind that I feel like a lot of people used to look at in terms of it was something. And now the US is just in this dumpster fire of a hole that is kind of just eating itself from the inside. Like, people aren't really interfering with us too heavily. Like, I saw some stuff about like Russia interfering with our election again and wanting to continue the divide in America. And this divide didn't go away. This divide has been here since the Civil War. Like, it's just that the racists and the bad people were quieter for a bit. And they've had somebody like Donald Trump who encouraged them to get loud and get passionate about the things that they care about, which are hating minorities and shooting guns and all of this stupid stuff, like upholding the Red Scare and hating on socialism. It's those things didn't go away. They've only been amplified at this point. And I'm really terrified to see where it's going to go after this next election, just because I don't know who's going to run. I don't know where things are going to go for the U.S. It's very up in the air. It feels like every day.
I mean, how much of this sort of need that people, you need to have a gun? Is this like a manliness thing? I mean, I've seen lots of Republican sort of photos where there are, it's not just the men who have these huge weapons, but their kids are holding them. There are women holding these weapons. It's not represented as just a man thing, but I mean.
Yeah.
Is there an element of this sort of manliness, this sort of, I'm a tough person, look at me?
Sometimes what's interesting is that the NRA heavily targets their firearm sales towards women. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, that's where they make up a large, like a lot of firearm sales in the U.S. happen from women. It's because of a lot of like the NRA has done a really good job of doing these like videos and stories about people who have been attacked and they were able to defend themselves because they had a gun. And they really target that towards as many people as they can. And at this point, it's primarily women that are buying up the guns from the NRA. Like, that's who they're targeting the most. I don't think that it's actually who's buying the most guns, but it's who the NRA targets the most. So what's weird is that it doesn't feel like a manly man thing. It feels much more like guns are an everybody thing. Anybody can have a gun. And that's what's crazy, is like anybody can have a gun and murder somebody else, but the right to bodily autonomy is gone for women. And like, children are in a constant vulnerable spot at school. People are homeless in this country. People don't have health care in this country. Like, there are so many wild things that we don't have figured out, but we kind of just keep going on these other like weird things that nobody else really agrees with or talks about.
Yeah, I mean, have you talked to female friends or relatives about how they feel about this, the Roe versus Wade decision? I mean, because here we are, sort of two guys, we're talking about Roe
Yeah.
versus Wade and so on. But I mean, I'm very much an ally, a supporter, a feminist. People can call me woke if they want. I'm like, yeah, I'm woke. I'm proud of that shit. Um,
Damn straight.
but yeah, but I mean, how? Because I've spoken to some women here in Europe, and obviously they are, disbelief, extreme disappointment, but that doesn't affect us here. What about women in the USA? Because I've read that there are some places where, as soon as the decision was made public, um, abortions were cancelled for women on that day,
Yeah.
and women who were waiting for their appointment, they got a call saying your appointment has been cancelled. I mean, that is a life changing telephone call. How do
Yeah.
how do people feel there?
It's terrifying. um, I've talked to a few of my female friends, talked to my mom. Um, it My friends are scared of like the future of this. The state that I live in is projected to close all of our clinics, um, which means that the nearest place that we can go to is, at least for us, where in the city that I'm in, is at least 3 hours away, um, for a drive like that. Um, and I'd have to go to Chicago for that because Illinois is keeping their abortion laws pretty much the same. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, they might even be expanding it um, to help with what's going to happen with the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Because after Texas did its ban, the surrounding states that still allowed abortion saw an increase of like 800% in the like treatments that they did. And so that's going to be a trend that we see with all of these states. Um, and that's terrifying, that if you're in a place where you desperately need this life-saving procedure, that you can't get it, and that the United States is kind of just telling you to get fucked and to figure it out yourself. Um, if anything, this really tracks with the U.S.'s like pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality. Um, but that mentality doesn't work anymore. Um, and that's what is really frustrating, is like there are so many people that are systematically put down by our government, like black people and Latin Americans in this country. They're going to see the effects of this abortion ruling quite heavily, unfortunately. Black women in America uh, have a mortality rate of, if I'm not mistaken, it's 3 to 4 times higher than white women, and that's before the age of 30. And then past that, it's 4 to 5 times. 4 to 5, not 45, just to be clear about that. Um, but that's because their communities are not built up in the way that they should be. It's because the government genuinely just doesn't give a fuck, and that's what's frustrating. Is that the people who are going to need these life-saving medications and these life-saving procedures aren't going to be able to get them. But the top echelon of people, like the top 1%, they're still going to be able to take their private jet over to a foreign country and get the abortion taken care of, or fly over state lines or some shit. And like it's been like that in the US since abortion was outlawed. Like the rich didn't have to see the consequences of it. They were always able to get out of country and take care of it that way. And that's not that just isn't possible for a lot of Americans.
Mm. Yeah, I read a book about it's called Girl by I forget the name of the author, but she referred to this, and she was pregnant. She was American, but she moved to the UK, and she was pregnant there, and the original or the initial hospital that she was referred to was of very poor standing, and she realized that, well, this was a racist decision. So her GP had automatically sent her to a very poor quality hospital because she was black. And then she said no. She refused it, and she booked herself into a hospital of superior quality. And only then was she in some way comfortable as to the ability of the doctors there and nurses to be able to take care of her. But not every person has that opportunity. Clearly not. That's not the case in the US in many cities. And so it does kind of make you wonder exactly. I mean, because this isn't even a question of being sinister, or this doesn't leave any doubt in the mind. This is very clearly a question of policies that are targeting ethnic minorities, minorities which definitely do not represent white Christian necessarily values, and of course women. And it's I fail to see how any society which in any way values its future cannot respect diversity, nor does it see an inherent need for gender equality within the system that it wants to build. I can't see a future in that country.
Yeah, I think a lot of Americans have that very similar feeling, unfortunately, of just that these steps backward after what felt like progress are extremely discouraging, and they really leave a lot. I think that is why young Americans are getting into politics, because we're tired of this. Like, we've seen change happen, and then we've seen it go backward, and that's frustrating. And to live in a country that constantly tells you that you can and can't do blah blah blah, but this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and you can pretty much kill anybody that you want if you're white, but pretty much nobody else, so get fucked. Like, this country is made for white people, and that sucks, because this is a country of immigrants and of people from every single background. And it's so frustrating to watch all these like rich white people in the top 1% just kind of control everything for us. Like with the gun manufacturers, with the arms dealers, like, they make a big deal in how our policies get enacted, and the amount of money that they put in the pockets of our politicians. Like, it's not in the hands of people at this point. Like, that's what sucks, is that the U.S. claims that it's a democracy, but it's not. Like, 5 out of the 6 Supreme Court judges that did the overturn yesterday or last week weren't appointed by a president who got the popular vote. Like, you lost. Like, if we're looking at it in that way, in terms of who got the most votes, because the electoral college is fucking bullshit in the U.S. It doesn't make any fucking sense. It should be based on a purely vote by vote basis. You get enough votes, tight, dog. You lost the popular vote. You don't get to do it anymore, dude. Like, and the majority of Americans agree with Roe v. Wade. It's 70-30. Like, it's not a democracy. These people do not make decisions for the betterment of all people, and they aren't doing it because the people tell them to. They're doing shit that big corporations tell them to do. They're doing stuff that they want to do, their own personal insights. And sometimes those insights do align with our views, but not often enough to actually see progress happen. Like, if they actually listened and actually did things that people told them to do, I feel as though we would see a lot more progress from the left. But we don't. happens because everybody's got their own agenda, everybody's got their own things that they're trying to do. It's incredibly confusing and frustrating to kind of like try to understand it all, because you can't. Like, there's too many layers, there's too many things going on, and it's extremely frustrating and disheartening at this point. Like, I think a lot of Americans feel that way, of just like, I don't know what to do. What can I do? Like, the Democratic Party's been like, go out and vote, go out and vote. I did. I went out and voted. You guys have been in power for the past 2 years and you haven't done anything. Like, what more can I do? Nothing. I can't do anything. Like, it's the ball's in your court. Like, I'm waiting on you to do something. And by the time that they'll try to do anything, there's the filibuster or the next election happens. Like, it's frustrating. It's just genuinely frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, where can you see this going? Because when general levels of frustration reach a certain point, thereafter there's no more containment. And I'm not advocating violence at all, but it seems to me that when hope, which is touted as always being the last to die, is gone, what options do people have? If you cannot trust that your child goes to school and will be educated in a safe environment and then will come home unscathed,
Yeah.
and you can no longer trust to that. If you cannot trust to the system, the educational system, the employment system, healthcare, women being treated fairly, all genders being treated equally, and also obviously the different sort of ethnic groups within the country are also being respected by a legal system which is also representative of their interests. When you put all of this together and you say, this is far from being a cohesive country or a social unit, then clearly there are going to be people that rise up, I imagine, without being too dramatic about it. I mean, would you say that looks like the kind of direction? And would you be surprised if there were some uprisings here and there?
We've already seen some. We've already seen, like, I've mentioned it multiple times, but the George Floyd protests, those were across this country in pretty much every single city, like moderately sized city to large. People on the left got together for the first time and had one thing that they all thought about. And enough that for a lot of us, we got tear gassed by the police for doing nothing. And that's the direction that we have to keep going, is to make the people in power uncomfortable, to make them to put them in question, and to ask, why are you doing this? What's the point? How is this helping me and my fellow Americans, my neighbors, my children, my parents? Like, we're going to see a point where Americans are going to get really tired of this. And I also don't support violence. I don't condone violence. Like, America's got very loose gun laws.
Yeah.
Like, the whole point of our country was to stand up to tyranny and to come up with our own thing. And it kind of seems like we might be at that point again. Thomas Jefferson said that the tree of liberty must be watered in blood from time to time. And things aren't changing around here. Like, people are getting murdered in the streets in cold blood by a scary police force that has an unbelievable amount of power and sees no repercussions whatsoever. People dying without health care on the streets. There are people without homes. There are people with drug overdoses. The opioid epidemic is still hitting America super hard. Like, there are so many issues that people are going to be tired of it. They are continuing and they are growing to more and more tired, and less complacent with where things are. They are not making enough money to live a comfortable life. They're not making enough money to pay off their student debt that the government told them and that school told them they should really go into school. They should get a degree. You should get a degree. But then they don't realize that you're coming out of school with like $80,000 of student debt, and that you're probably not going to be able to pay that off ever. Like, that's terrifying. It's it's so systematically flawed that it feels like there needs to be some change from the inside, like a complete overhaul. Because it's just not working, and it hasn't been working. Like, that's what really is annoying, is that it just hasn't worked for a little while now, unfortunately.
Yeah, before the pandemic, we had Fridays for Future, and this was obviously quite a popular movement among the young in Europe, at least. How popular was this in the USA?
What was it called again?
Friday for Future is where basically the kids have you even heard of it? No, Friday for
No,
Future.
I've
No,
never heard of that.
Greta Thunberg.
No,
No.
no. Yeah, no, I want to hear about this.
All right, so Greta Thunberg, she must be about 2021 now, but when she was 15, she basically came out and was extremely critical of all of the governments around the world. And she began this movement, which is called Friday for Future. So the kids of a certain age would just walk out of school and would demonstrate and say, we
Wow.
want, every Friday we're going to demonstrate until there is a change in policy with regards to climate change. And so lots of people were quite complimentary about this. I love the fact that these younger people were taking such steps. And obviously she attracted the ire of lots of conservative and right-wing politicians. I think even Trump was quite critical of her. I mean, if Trump criticizes you, then you know that you're onto something good.
Yeah.
And this was this sort of breakthrough of this young 15, 16-year-old girl at the time. And I think she's wonderful. So, but you haven't heard much of this movement, okay?
Yeah, no. Definitely know about Greta Thunberg. She is a fierce woman at this point. Like, she is just a powerhouse. Like, she's terrifying in terms of, like, she knows it all. She's got like this stare to her that just, like, she knows what she's talking about. She knows what she's doing. She's awesome. But we never had anything like that at least in my school. I went to school I went to school in Indiana, and I've also gone to school in Washington. I've also gone to school in Oregon, and I don't remember anything like that. And that really blows, because that sounds like something that the U.S. could really use right now. It's like, I think if you saw all these young people going out and doing something like that, that there would be kind of this view of, we need to do something. Like, these are the hands that we're leaving this for, and I wish that more people kind of saw it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel really, really bad about the responsibilities that we are essentially passing on to the next generation. And it just gets worse and worse. So, it's not as though we're making the future for our kids and our unborn grandchildren any easier, because it's not at all.
And for those people who don't want to have grandchildren or children at all, there's no choice. Like, that's the thing that sucks, is like, if you're one of those people who doesn't want to bring a child into this horrific, terrifying world that just keeps burning itself up because we don't know how to treat it, you can't make that choice. You've got to have that child. Like, that's unbelievable. Like, no choice, man. It sucks. It really sucks.
Yeah, I can hear the frustrations of just rolling off your tongue. So, I mean, just if I can end then on a kind of personal note, I mean, how do you see yourself sort of reconciling with the fact that you have to play a certain kind of role in society? So you got to do a job. Either you adhere to the rules of society and you sort of keep quiet, put your head down and get working, or do you feel that obviously you've got a political opinion, you've got a position, you've got a voice. Are you the kind of person who's going to, rush out into the streets and lead a demonstration or organize one and get the youth moving? How would you do it? How would you want to do?
Yeah, that is absolutely something that I done a little bit before and am continuing to try to figure out how I can do that in the future. I find a lot of value in coming together as a group and leading groups of people into these sorts of movements. Like, I see myself absolutely going down a political path of figuring out how I can help my city, my state, and if I can, even the country. Um, because I think I'd be able to do it, and I have this like drive to do it. Um, but we've done a few protests here in my town for abortion, um, and I've attended a few of those. Um, but like, I'd really like to just keep doing what I'm doing and keep learning and keep talking to as many people as I can, because I think that that's something that's really important, is the viewpoints and perspectives that you can get from so many different people. It really gives you a different appreciation for where things are, um, and also I guess a fear as well of where things could be going. Um, Definitely talk to people that tell me stories where I'm scared at the idea of where things could go, and scared of the idea of where things are at already. Um, it it's really bizarre to live in this country at such a what feels like historically important time. Like this feels like it's just somebody in the future right now still writing all this stuff into a history book, and like it still hasn't stopped. Um, and I don't know when it will, but I'd really like to just keep figuring out how I can involve myself in my local politics. I've already started looking at going to a few of our like local city hall meetings and whatnot, just to see like what my local politicians are talking about, um, because I don't like many of them. Um, and I think that a lot of young people are feeling a very similar way and are starting to get involved in it early on, which is really important. Is like getting into it early and doing it young, I feel like gives you a different appreciation and also a better understanding of like where things could go. Like I think history really did influence me in the politics direction, because if I didn't do all my history before I got into politics of learning how this stuff happened and why it happened, I wouldn't have had like the knowledge to just like be like, all right, I can just jump right into politics because I have past knowledge. Um, I hope that history in that regard doesn't fall away to the wayside as well, in terms of like we're seeing so many things happen again and again and again, and it feels like it's because we just kind of keep forgetting about stuff, and that's really frustrating. Or we don't, or not forgetting about stuff, but we just don't talk about it, or we don't teach it in schools, um, and that's terrifying. So I'd really like to see what I can do to just kind of involve myself, I guess.
And do you think, just one last question, do you think there's room in your locality for a sort of third party, an independent party within the political establishment to, because if you don't like the politicians that you've got that represent your locality, then I don't think
Yeah.
you'd be alone in that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, what's kind of weird is third party in the U.S. is not it's just not super prevalent. A lot of people don't vote third party. It's also not really talked about. Um, America very heavily keeps it Democrat and Republican, and that there's nothing else. And that is not the truth. There is that third party, but it's super, super, super rare that a third party gets elected for anything. Um, period. Like that's just. I think that overall there have maybe been like 3 or 4 third party politicians that have like gotten into like somewhat higher echelons of power, um, and like compared to the how many Democrats and Republicans, because it's all that we've had the entire time. Like it's it's really it's going to be interesting in that regard of like I hope that we see more third party. I hope that we see more people kind of like come out with different political ideas and different like groups to stand with, because I do think that a lot less people are finding themselves agreeing with Democrats and Republicans, like either or. Like it's not just one or the other. There's always an in between. Like it's not yes or no. There's always like there's that third party. There's that middle choice. Um, so personally, I hope that we see the third party like rise and grow, and I hope that somebody can like do it. Um, but I just don't know if that'll ever happen because we are so deeply rooted in that Democrat Republican mindset.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Aydan, thank you. It's great to have your thoughts and the perspective. Even though there are many parts of the conversation where we clearly agree, it's still great to have the perspective that you have, the individual insights of the experiences of being there and experiencing these events sort of at first hand. Would you invite the opportunity to come back and talk about some more issues, more political topics? Because I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on similar events.
Yeah, absolutely, Zach. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you talking to me about this today. This has been extremely fun, and I'm extremely excited to hopefully keep chatting with you about this stuff because this is definitely this is the stuff that I really enjoy talking about, and I spend a lot of time like reading and watching and listening, and I just want to talk about the stuff that I've learned at this point, and the things that I've experienced too. So I'm thankful that you're having me on for this.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, and yeah, I look forward to the next one. And
Yeah, thank you so much, man.
two and a mic.